Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma Vigeland out today. Joining me now, Ari Tolany, research consultant for Women for Weapons Trade Transparency. Ari, did I say your name, your last name correctly?
Yes, you did.
Okay. Well, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us. Saw this piece that you contributed to with Lillian Malden and Janet Abu Elias in these times, talking about the how Israel got an endless supply of U.S.-made smart bombs. That's really sort of the beginning of the story in many respects. But walk us through this. I think there's this perception that there are specific numbers of weapons that are sold at a specific time, and that's it, and there's a cap on it, and anything else that has to happen through Congress. But a couple of years ago, there was basically, I don't know, an open door policy that was sort of written into the legislation. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so to understand this precision-guided munitions stockpiling, we really need to start with understanding the war reserves that Israel has kind of a unique access to. So the United States all around the world positions stockpiles of materiel in the event that a conflict goes hot, so that in theory it can be drawn upon quickly. In 1984, the first of those stockpiles was established in Israel. You may recall that was when Reagan was pulling troops out of Lebanon and trying to create some kind of security guarantee there. Moving on, those stockpiles have become a kind of rich reserve for Israel to draw on particular kinds of munitions with very little congressional oversight and often very little executive level oversight. So in the 2006 war and the 2014 war against Lebanon, Israel drew a pretty heavy amount of munitions from the stockpile, but we really do not have a very strong accounting of what is in that stockpile or what the sort of thresholds are. If the U.S. has contributed the maximum amount it has been allowed to for the past several years, we can expect that that's a stockpile of roughly 4.4 billion USD weapons, in weapons not adjusted for inflation. And so the precision-guided munitions, which are a particularly deadly and dangerous form of weapon, are one of Israel's sort of first lines of defense that it really heavily relies on when it is engaging with Hamas or other groups.
So in terms of these stockpiles, like, are they just, I mean, whose are they? In other words, like, are they U.S. weapons that we're, I don't know, like renting warehouses in somewhere in Israel and saying, can we just leave these here? Or are they earmarked for Israel? Like who owns these? And then, and if we own them, how do the Israelis just go in and take them as if it's like some type of, I don't know, stock room?
So there's the theory of what happens, and then there's the practice of what happens, right? So in theory, these are U.S. weapons reserves. We actually pulled on stockpiles in Israel to refuel tanks and supply Ukraine with munitions. So these are U.S. munitions. However, in practice, and particularly with a special relationship like Israel, the partner country is allowed to essentially pull without limit from the war reserve stockpile. And that's not something that was just happened overnight. This is something that was steadily built into legislation. And so when you look at this year's National Defense Authorization Act, which is about to be passed, as well as the supplemental funding request, those include a suite of provisions related to that stockpile, including getting rid of all caps. So in theory, the U.S. is supposed to only transfer up to 200 million into the Israeli stockpile. That is getting rid of that completely. Getting rid of all congressional notification or any form of notification of Israel going in and hauling out weapons. And also, historically, those weapons that were put in or purchased were meant to be provided at fair market value. And the supplemental has changed that, which again has not passed yet, and we don't know if it's going to pass. But the supplemental has changed that fair market value to any value determined by the Secretary of Defense, meaning we can essentially give the Israelis incredibly cheap, highly dangerous weapons, circumventing the traditional congressional oversight that the Arms Export Control Act established.
So does that, so if we've got $4 billion worth of weapons that are stored there in this sort of like just stock room, as it were, does those only count towards whatever, the $3 billion annual that we provide for Israel? Or ostensibly this $14 billion supplemental if it passes. They only count at this point, if this supplemental passes, as much as the Secretary of Defense decides that they're going to count, right? I mean, if these are like low cost, expensive weapons, they won't count against that. But what about up to this point? Like, have they been dipping into these stockrooms, or we just don't know? And what's the accounting? Like, do they have a credit, or is this just something we're going to owe you this in the future, and maybe future funds that we get will be applied against this?
So this has been a big concern for Women for Weapons Trade Transparency, because for the public and sort of for research analysts on the outside, it is very difficult to tell what is going on. What I will say is that it is unlike the United States and Israel to have a provision like this and not use it. So in past NDAAs, after the 2014 war in Gaza, Israel asked for a lot more access to PGMs. And then in the fiscal year 2021 National Defense Authorization Act, they received this limitless PGM hack, essentially, where they can withdraw any PGMs from that stockpile without having to refer to the annual notification limits.
And PGM?
Sorry. A PGM is a precision-guided munition, which has been sort of the bulk of it's been Israel's weapon of choice in the bombardment of Gaza. In the first 2 weeks after October 7th, Israel dropped about 90% of its bombs, which were 1,000 to 2,000 pound satellite-guided bombs. The Washington Post just reported from some leaked intelligence that 22,000 U.S. bombs have been used in Gaza, and that we have transferred another 15,000 bombs and 50,000 rounds of 155 millimeter artillery shells.
And so when we say 22,000 U.S. bombs, we're not even talking about bombs that were built in the U.S. and sold to the Israelis. We're talking about just our bombs that they basically used, as if like we left our car in their driveway and said, use it whenever you want, essentially.
So some of those bombs likely came from the War Reserve stockpile. Some of them likely came from congressional notified sales. There's sort of a lot of different pipelines where weapons are coming from. And in the case of Israel and some other countries, that reporting is deliberately opaque in being able to determine what munitions have been sent, their value, and where.